It's on. You might need to just talk.
Okay. Is that okay? Good. All right. My name is Laura Miller, and I'm a graduate assistant in the Instructional Technology Division at the University of Illinois Graduate School of Library and Information Science. And this is a panel on higher education in the 21st century. So with us today we have Edward Valauskas, who is a lecturer at Dominican University and founder of the website First Monday. We also have Nicole Cooke, who is a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana, Champaign. And then Wlll, who is an instruction and e-resource librarian at Loyola University in Chicago. So we're going to get started with Edward Valauskas. And he has a website to share with us.
Right. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to talk a little bit about scholarly communication and how scholars are changing the sort of face of the information world. And of course I'm going to be very egotistical and talk about something that I've worked with for a number of years, a journal called First Monday. It's a internet-only peer-reviewed journal that started in 1996, and we've published to date 203 issues and literally thousands of papers. It focuses on internet research, so the journal makes sense for it to be based on the internet. It's an openly accessible journal, that is, all the content is freely available, both current content and the past content, and it was one of the first journals to have this sort of model. It was openly accessible before the term open access really had been invented. And so it's an interesting model, an interesting example of what's happened in scholarship. I checked this morning, the directory of open access journals lists some 9,035 journals that are openly accessible. Now that's of various permutations of how you might define open access. But open access has really been pushing a number of different ventures in making information available in a very broad way, in a very broad brush. And that's been driven by scholars and librarians. Being on campus makes me think of the number of ways in which this university, the staff and faculty of this university have accelerated open access. I remember back in the 1990s when President Clinton and Vice President Gore were encouraging various departments to make websites, to create websites and put content on the internet. One of the departments that was reluctant to do that was the State Department, because they were concerned about, they had obvious concerns about security, about the kinds of information that might be available. What's interesting is that a group of librarians, faculty, and staff from this university went to the State Department and helped the State Department create a website for the U.S. Department of State. So the U.S. Department of State website in the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, was not based in Washington, D.C. It was on a server down Roosevelt Road, actually down Taylor Street. And it was managed by staff here at the university. They not only managed content for that server, but they managed State Department email. So they had various kinds of filters that could deal with people who might say inappropriate remarks to the Secretary of State and deal with that and pass those on to security. So scholars here on this campus have been very involved, and library staff have been very involved in encouraging open access at a variety of levels. The library here, working with the Computer Science Center, has encouraged scholars to make scholarship available through openly accessible journals, and the library has been a very strong advocate for the use of open journal system software. It's open source software that was created by the University of British Columbia and Simon Fraser University in Vancouver to allow scholars to create openly accessible journals. And so here at UIC, there is essentially an OJS center where scholars can work on creating journals in this openly accessible model. And in fact, First Monday, when it was first published, was originally published by a Danish publisher called Munksgaard. And Munksgaard published it as an experiment in internet publishing because they wanted to apply models from First Monday to their other for-profit journals, for-profit scholarly journals. And they were publishing journals like Liver, and I always ask the editors of Liver, do they publish recipes? They never liked those jokes. So Munksgaard learned how to use First Monday, the lessons from First Monday, and apply them to other journals. And at the end of 1998, Munksgaard said it wasn't going to publish First Monday any longer, and we moved the journal to UIC. So the first issues were published here on campus at First Monday in the beginning of 1999, and that's a relationship that we continue to this day. So what's happening in terms of what scholars are doing with open access is that they've been pushing the envelope of making all sorts of information available to lots of different audiences. And there's interesting studies that have been accumulating over the past few years, and I want to show you a few slides. I have a talk here that will go on for hours, so I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I'm going to go through a few of these slides if I can make them work. We'll see. This slide shows, it was from a study a few years ago showing the growth of open access journals and articles. And the growth of open access journals and articles tends to be very robust, tends to be a much greater growth rate, both in terms of the number of journals and the number of articles compared to what we see in for-profit proprietary journals. So there is a migration of scholarship to these openly accessible journals and to these articles. And what's interesting is that there are also, at the same time that these journals are growing, these sorts of openly accessible journals are growing, and the content's growing in these journals, there are tools to measure the value of that content for various kinds of faculty promotion committees. So there are various kinds of tools that have been developed to deal with this new development, which is, I think, also very exciting and interesting. Let's see if I can go to the next slide here.
Looks like they're opening new tabs.
I'm opening new tabs. Oh my God, why is it doing that? That's interesting. Okay, well, let's close some of these tabs. Why is it doing that? That's interesting. So if you look at the volume in these open access journals, the volume of content in these journals has steadily been growing since the mid-90s as well. Some of the first openly accessible journals began to appear in 1992 and 1993. What's also interesting is who's using this content. And so there have been studies looking at the use of openly accessible content, and the greatest use of this content tends to be in places where people can't afford proprietary scholarship, proprietary journals from a variety of publishers, and you all know their names. And so the brighter colors indicate where openly accessible content is being used. And in fact, there seem to be some interesting trends in Europe with the financial crises in some countries such as Greece, scholars working at institutions where the institutions can no longer pay for journal subscriptions from Elsevier or Wlll, take your pick. They are turning to openly accessible journals to publish their work and also do their research. If we look at this open access development, there are actually three phases that you could probably outline in this development. The first phase, which I was part of, was where scholars started up these openly accessible journals because they were essentially angry with the proprietary publishers in the way they controlled copyright, the way they controlled content. And certainly that was my story. I was not happy with the way in which proprietary publishers restricted my use of my own work in the classroom. So there were a number of scholars who started up journals and created these journals to publish their work and the work of their colleagues. The second phase that really occurred around 2000, oops, was that me? That was me. My father would say my teeth fell. I don't know why he would say that, but perhaps because he had false teeth. Okay, see if this works. Sorry about that. That was my own big feet getting in the way of the mic. So the second phase around the year 2000 is correlated to various foundations essentially creating initiatives supporting open access. And we see some little bumps further on towards today that are indications of proprietary publishers developing various kinds of schemes to support open access, albeit sometimes it's fee-based, sometimes it has various kinds of restrictions. You can put up a rough draft of a paper, you can't put up the finished copy, but they call that open access. So these three phases are interesting, and I'll do that again. That's interesting. This must not be a left-handed mouse, huh? Yeah. Keeps opening up that. Oops, hold on. Part of the initial development of these openly accessible journals was caused by software development at Urbana, University of Illinois. Mark Andreessen, at the undergraduate, the famous undergraduate at the University of Illinois, who took essentially the code that was freely available from CERN that showed you how to work with the web. He created a graphic interface, a graphic browser to web content. And literally that development of that graphic browser caused a revolution not only in terms among scholars looking to the web as a way of publishing papers, but all sorts of individuals. There was the development of PLOS One, which encouraged scholars to seriously consider these journals as an outlet for their research. I talked to Peter Mavicki at the paleontologist at the Field Museum about this paper that he published recently in PLOS One. It was his first openly accessible journal, paper in an openly accessible journal, but he wanted this paper about Sue, the famous T-Rex, to reach a large audience, and he knew this was the best place to do this. There have been publishers that have been creating these openly accessible schemes. Springer Verlag, for instance, has a scheme where you pay, I think it's $1,000 or $1,500 to be able to get this openly accessible content, have your paper openly accessible. And then there were initiatives such as the Soros Foundation creating this, the first of many initiatives to encourage scholars to publish in openly accessible journals. The Budapest Open Access Initiative was probably the most famous of these. It was the first of these. Just having computer problems today. And then, as I mentioned earlier, two Canadian institutions created the software, open source software, called Open Journal Systems, which I think really was aimed at scholars in the developing world, but now is used by scholars everywhere, to create openly accessible journals on the internet, on the web. And there are literally thousands of journals using this software. It's relatively easy to use. And it's being open source, it's constantly in a state of revision. So it allows you not only to publish a journal, but to do the whole peer review process. And for me, Open Journal Systems saved me a great deal of mental health because First Monday was suffering from its own popularity as and still suffers from its own popularity as a scholarly publishing journal. A journal published papers about the internet, and before we started using open journal systems, we had an enormous backlog, and it was very hard to keep track of all the papers using my poor filing system of my brain, which was not the best place for it to be. And then we started seeing commercial publishers. This is the most recent development. Commercial publishers such as Macmillan with Nature creating journals that are just openly accessible for anyone to use. And this most recent venture called Scientific Reports is a completely openly accessible journal that Macmillan has launched to parallel its other proprietary fee-based journals such as the most important scientific journal in the world, Nature. The Directory of Open Access Journals in Sweden provided an inventory, but it also of these journals, but also provided a way in which content could be accessed. So over 1 million articles can be accessed through this one portal, taking advantage of the metadata in the papers. So this is a very important site in bringing all these openly accessible journals together in one place and creating essentially a mega index to all that content. It's definitely not a left-handed mouse. I don't know why it keeps opening at the same time. This window. Oops. Am I hitting the wrong button? Is that it? Perhaps that's what I'm doing.
It could be a browser setting, but it might also be a web page. So you can mess with it to figure it out.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if this works. The other interesting development is that a number of libraries have moved forward, national libraries have moved forward now to collect and archive this content. So the Dutch National Library has moved forward in collecting all the digital content created in the Netherlands, including all the scholarship that's created. So they're working with commercial publishers such as Kluwer and Elsevier in collecting all the scholarship that's created by those publishers and preserving it at the library. And I think that is an amazing development with their sort of cooperation. Thank you for that note. A similar sort of a scheme is being attempted by the Library of Congress, albeit in a much more arcane way, being the Library of Congress. A few years ago, they issued this requirement of a mandatory deposit of all electronic works that were created, although they provided no explanation of how you were supposed to do that. There was a meeting that was held. First Monday was invited to participate in this meeting to help them develop techniques, and we're continuing to work with the Library of Congress in developing techniques. So even essentially our de facto National Library is working and collecting electronic content, in part because the Library of Congress realizes how much content it has lost. So all of these different measures show that there is, from higher education, there is a great deal of interest of creating content that is broadly available, that is outside of these proprietary buckets that are controlled very tightly by various kinds of publishers for profit. What's also interesting is that there's a ripple effect in that the same scholars who do this work to create openly accessible content work to create all sorts of openly accessible content in a variety of different ways. So the long history that UIC has had in working with different agencies and creating websites is an example of that, not only for the US State Department. UIC was instrumental in creating websites, the initial websites for the Chicago Public Library, the American Library Association, and other organizations. So there is this, I guess there's this switch that occurs when scholars work on open access. They realize the benefits of open access in very broad terms. And my real concern is how we'll continue the momentum of this. I teach in the library school at Dominican University, and we have a number of classes in which we are training the next generation of scholars, next generation of librarians to continue this open access momentum. Having them work on an openly accessible journal that the school publishes called Wlll Libraries, working on different kinds of, archiving different kinds of interesting content. My students have been working on creating a website for an archive for a punk band that was based in Chicago in the 1980s called Da. What a great name for a band, right? Da. And so collecting all the information from Da to make it available online in an openly accessible website. So I think this is a trend that will continue and become stronger with openly accessible content being available in a variety of different kinds of permutations, and scholars taking advantage of internet technologies, taking advantage of cheap storage, in this pervasiveness of this technology. Thank you. And sorry for my clumsiness with the web browser. Oh, that's right. Watch out, it's dangerous. My big head's in the way. There we go. Now my big head's not in the way.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you all hear me with this mic or no? No. Better now?
I think we have that turned off.
Oh.
It's my big feet that did it.
Try it one more.
Now? No?
I think we might reduce this one.
Okay.
So that's fine. Just bring this over and
All right.
right there. Fine. No? Is that on? Here we go.
Okay. Are we good now? Yeah. Okay. So, good afternoon. So, you know, it's not a coincidence that we're talking about technology, and it's only good when it works. So today I'll be talking to you a little bit about online learning or distance education. So, in parentheses, I have library because I do teach at the library school at University of Illinois, Urbana, Champaign. But I think a lot of what I'll be talking about is applicable to distance education in general. So by way of that, what I'll be talking to you about today is an article that I recently wrote for Library and Book Trade Almanac 2013. So if anyone has any interest in some of the more specific details, because I have a lot of dates and things about the history of education, this is what I'm drawing on. So usually when I start talking about distance education, I like to tell people that before I landed at Wlll in Urbana, Champaign, I was a practicing librarian for about 15 years. And most of my time was spent in an academic library, and for the academic librarians in the room, a lot of you may need to get tenure in order to progress in your position. And so at the time I was working nights, and the only way that I was going to be able to get that second degree that I needed for tenure was to do a degree completely via distance education. And I am totally honest when I say that I hated every second of it. It was a very isolating and frustrating experience, and when I decided that I was going to go back for my doctorate, it was one of those questions, how can I do this better? There's got to be a better way to make distance education more palatable, more engaging, and just more fun. I mean, you want to obviously learn something, but if you're going to spend that much time and typically that much money, you want to be able to have a well-rounded experience all the way around. So I tell you that just to give you a little background about where I'm coming from with my research. So distance education, it's a classic example of everything old is new again. Distance education has been around in various iterations for a very long time. So in terms of who, so at this point it might be fair to say that everyone is involved in distance education at some level, whether you are doing it informally with blogs and wikis and just personal development that you do with the internet or via formal education. So for example, the LEAP program that we have at UIUC. So distance education does cater to adults, adult learners, those who are working, those with families, those with time and distance obligations. Distance education is also well known for reaching the disabled or those who cannot physically travel or physically attend classes in a face-to-face venue. But more and more we're seeing that traditional age college students, 18 to 22, are increasingly among the highest rates of students enrolled in these classes. And so then that leads to the why. So a lot of this is convenience. You know, you have that conception of people sitting in front of a laptop with bunny slippers and in their PJs and they can do it at 2 a.m. and a lot of that is very true. But more than that, it allows flexibility of time. So people they don't have to stop their lives. They can continue with their obligations and still continue their education. Along with that is, with distance education, you are now, or we are now, able to reach experts globally. So I'm from New Jersey, and when I went to get most of my degrees, I was in a face-to-face classroom at Rutgers University. However, now I would have the option of going to Japan or any place internationally around the world to find a subject expert and be able to have a class with that person. So online learning allows for that flexibility. And another part of the why is, you know, let's face it, distance education is big business. So whether we're dealing with public universities or private universities, a lot of what we're seeing, the uptick of students and enrollment, can be directly attributed to marketing. You see, you know, University of Phoenix on TV every day. You see billboards, you see them on the buses and things of that nature. So in terms of the what, when, and where, so essentially the when and where is anytime, any place. Part of the what, and I'll just give you a few dates, I won't bore you with the whole trajectory of distance education, but to go back to the beginning, the establishment of the first university-level correspondence teaching department was at the University of Chicago in the late 1800s. Distance education came to radio in 1921, so various universities were giving, I guess, broadcast, if you will, of their content. The first televised course was at the State University of Iowa in 1933. The first audio conference via telephone for distance education was in 1965. And then the first online undergraduate course came in 1984 at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. So you can see that this is going way back, and what's really changing is not necessarily the content, but it is the mode of delivery. And that's something that we continue to see in online learning, particularly with the advent of MOOCs and things of, you know, how the technology is changing, how we're reaching new groups, etc. So according to the literature, we are now in the phase of distance education that is referred to as the user-centered, or the new millennium, or the 5th generation model of distance education. And that really is speaking to you're leaving the teacher-centered model behind, you're leaving the technology-based, text-based, and you're moving more towards active learning and trying to interact with distance students in a way that was not previously happening. We are also seeing distance education moving more and more into K-12. And so there are high schools, there are elementary schools experimenting with distance education. You have Khan Academy and other different initiatives that are on YouTube, and people are getting a lot of knowledge from videos and other forms of media, where traditionally they would be receiving that from an instructor face-to-face. So with all the benefits that come with distance education, there are some drawbacks, and mainly that is coming into play with the lack of verbal cues, the lack of interaction. Distance education, particularly in the online format, can be a very flat environment. All right, and I think that's probably why I didn't enjoy it. So there was no interaction, it was just very flat. This is the content, you're supposed to absorb it, and then I'm supposed to write paper, and then I'm supposed to re-upload it. So it was a very clinical exchange, if you will. And so to that end, I think there needs to be a better pedagogy that we're developing for online learning. We have to figure out how to really engage with the users in that sense. So if you heard the plenary session this morning talking about a lot of the initiatives at CPL, Chicago Public, for all the technology that they provide to their patrons, they still love the spaces where they can come face to face and they can talk to one another and interact on a physical basis and not just online. All right, so just to talk a little bit about library education, it parallels quite a bit with the history of distance education in general. So, for example, the first library distance, if you will, via correspondence was in 1888. The first satellite location was in 1957 by the University of Oklahoma. Indiana University started with two-way video in 1995. And then in 1996, Rutgers started their program asynchronously, and also Illinois started their LEAP program also in 1996. And I will take just an opportunity to make the distinction between the modes of delivery. So that's another piece of the distance education discussion that we need to have. So asynchronous versus synchronous mode of delivery, that's a very different type of learning. All right, so you know, one of the hallmarks of distance education is that it can appeal to many different types of learning styles, and I think that instructors as well as students need to be aware of what's going to be best for them. So just to give you a little background on, I don't even know if it's a trend anymore, it's just a continuation of this proliferation of distance education. So the American Library Association, which is based here in Chicago, they accredit master's level programs in library and information science. So in 2012, out of the 58 accredited programs, 24 of them offered some of their curriculum online. 13 provided a significant portion of their program online. Significant is going to vary from institution to institution. 23 of the 58 programs offered their programs entirely online. And so that's where library and information science is becoming more global, because even at GISLIS, we have students in Japan, we have students all over the world that are able to take part in our offerings because of that option. So in terms of the characteristics, and this could be said for characteristics of anyone that is learning online, online students need community. All right, so as I mentioned, this very flat interface that is distance education, it's not going to be enough. There has to be a way to engage the students and make them feel like they're part of the school, they're part of this experience. With that, they need to be active, creative, and there needs to be an opportunity for these students to co-create the knowledge and the experience that is going on in these online learning environments. There is an article, or several articles, by Carolyn Haythornthwaite, who is now at the University of British Columbia, who has written a lot in this area. She refers to the idea of fading back. And she says that if students who are learning via distance education are not involved in some way, they will fade back and they will withdraw and they will not be involved. So this could be retention issues. They may not finish the program. A lot of distance education programs have a high dropout rate. Students feel like they're not getting what they need, they're not learning what they want, they're not engaged, and so it's just very simple to withdraw from the program and go back to face-to-face classes or just not pursue their education at all. So in terms of moving towards a more effective online pedagogy, so this is the part where I'll tell you a little bit about a recent research project that I conducted. I was looking at 2 online classes. I was looking at classes that were being conducted asynchronously. So again, this would be a very different study if I had studied synchronous students. And so I studied 2 classes, and I was looking primarily at their threaded discussion. So again, very text-based, very heavy with the writing. So over the course of the semester, these students generated upwards of 2,000 pages of discussions. And so when I was looking through all of this data, I was looking for really how they were exchanging information and how that might impact their learning. But what was really coming out was the students' efforts to connect with one another, to form that community with one another. And so they were using others' personal names, they were referring to personal incidents. Do you remember this, and what about that? And this was all above and beyond the content that they were exchanging. And so when questioned about that, they said that they wanted to know their classmates. They wanted to have more than just the avatars or their names listed in the course management system. They wanted to be able to feel like they had a relationship with their classmates and also with their instructors. And so that's referred to as immediacy, that personal connection. In terms of developing that immediacy and that community, social presence is key. So again, that is, how are you providing students the opportunity to engage on a personal level? So it becomes more important to make the online learning environment even more so, not just about the content, but about the people as well. And particularly in LIS education, how are we making this information relevant to them as future library professionals? So then you get a lot of stories, you get a lot of anecdotes and things that will make that information more immediate to them. As I mentioned earlier, we are now into that phase of user-centered learning. So it's not just about the instructor delivering the content, but it's about interacting and asking questions and asking input of the students so they can provide their own experience and tailor their learning environment to what they need. And then that speaks to instructional design as well. One of the things that I found in the research was the class that was most successful with this building of community and connecting with one another was the course where the instructor took the extra time to really customize that course environment. So we're using Blackboard or Collaborate or Angel or any of the different course management systems that people use. They're also very flat. They're very plain. The one instructor that I'm thinking of, he put his baby pictures up, and he really made an effort to give some personal details about himself. And just by that small gesture of instructional design, he really was able to set the tone for the semester and be able to interact with his students on another level. Now, the second class I studied, the instructor just put his email address up in the syllabus and he left. And that's the class that had a lot more difficulty forming community, and when asked about it later, they felt that the instructor abandoned them, and they had a lot of issues with the instructor because they were never able to connect with him on that level. So in terms of instructional design, there has to be some extra effort to kind of customize and draw people in. So again, distance education is not meant to be a substitute for face-to-face education, but there are some ways that we can go about really customizing that experience and making that experience an active learning environment and not just flat text and an exchange of textual content. Thank you.
And then last up we have Wlll Kit before there's some Q&A.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wlll Kent. I'm going to pull you through the afternoon here with me. I specialize in instruction and reference. I work at Loyola University on the Lakeshore campus up in Rogers Park and Edgewater. Before I dive in, I don't have a presentation. I prefer to be interactive with you guys, so I'm going to ask some questions every now and again. So please be on your toes. Stay with me here. Don't fall asleep. I'll make it interesting. But who am I? I'm very interested in higher education. Loyola is the 5th university that I've worked at. I have a large investment in low-income, first-generation, going college students. That's what drew me to higher education to begin with, just the idea of education as a transformative process, and technology and libraries specifically as a place where that plays out. So I've worked in Boston and in the Chicago area and in Illinois. I went to Gislis in Champaign, Urbana, and I've done several forms of instruction there. I worked at a Baptist church in Champaign and North Champaign. I was a cyber navigator at Chicago Public Library for a while, so I worked with very diverse communities of people, but I guess the central theme for me is technology as a tool for social change. At least it has the ability to do that. And so, at Loyola, I wear many hats, and I try to infuse that work ethic into many of my duties and responsibilities on campus, which include working at the reference desk, conducting instructional sessions. I help out with e-resources, so any sort of database or e-journal. I'm a point person if there's an issue or if things are working well, which isn't always. I help with collection development. I aid with the website design and use. I'm in charge of LibGuides, and if you're unfamiliar with LibGuides, it's a content management system for librarians. They're kind of website templates where you can post a lot of information in box and tab form. They're convenient sometimes, other times not, but they're a major tool for us in our instruction sessions, and it's a great way to display a lot of information in a short amount of time. We're also launching an e-commons initiative. We're trying to create a repository for professors and students if they're interested in putting their work on a Loyola server, and it's going to be open access so people can look at it from wherever and not have to worry about paying for it. Brings about its own set of challenges. And then probably what I do the most is research assistance. So I work with both professors and students answering whatever sort of question they have about what research they're doing. And so a question I'd like to present to you right off the bat is, what is the purpose of a library and a research institution today? Because as I revealed to you, there's a lot that I do on campus, and there's a lot more that a library does, and it's going to change for every individual that decides to walk through the door of the library. So what does that building mean to everybody, and what does it mean to the university on campus? And at Loyola, just for some more background, we have about 15,000 students, half undergrad, half graduate or postgraduate, and the library is unique because it shares an information commons, which is in the heart of the campus. So geographically, I'm thrilled. It's advantageous because it's hard to miss. It's a big, beautiful building. I invite you to all come and visit because it's right along Lake Michigan. There's a beach nearby, maybe best to come in the summertime. But more than that, it's a place where students come to gather and spend time in addition to getting work done. And so that adds a whole nother layer of engagement to the library. And as a person who lives and works in the library, it changes the nature of my job too, because I would like to foster an environment that is not all work and not all play, but somewhere in the middle, which is an unspoken part of any librarian's job and any library. It serves many purposes. And it's one of those rare spots on campus or in the city or wherever you want to conceptualize a library, where it's a neutral space, or it's a space where potentially you can make what you want of it. It's not a formal classroom, or it's not a field. It doesn't have one distinct specific purpose, which is great for people who can handle it, and other people who have a hard time without rules. It can lead to confusing use of space and people shouting loudly or not working hard enough. Anyway, more issues. And all of this is just to say that during my sessions, these are things that I like to address with the students, whether or not it's tangential or part of my formal lesson. So there are many challenges in doing instruction in higher education. Most of all is that there's a big emphasis on research, and so it's my job to unpack the databases for both professors and students, and those change on a regular basis. So it's very much a dynamic atmosphere, and there's always more to learn, which isn't apparent to people who are ingrained in the institution for a very long time. And this includes students, because once they begin and once they develop their routine, whenever anything changes or whenever the nature of their assignment changes or the nature of the research changes, they are surprised by how much adaptation needs to happen. And so it's my job to be that adapter for the professors and the students, even if it's as subtle as when the website changes and we have to calm everyone down and reorient them. that's a big part of my job. And it's something that, again, isn't apparent by a reference librarian title. But it's a big part of what we do. What's more is a lot of the students that I'm used to working with and that I'm looking to work with more in the future in Loyola might not be at the same starting point as many other students. I work with a lot of first-year students. I teach an instruction session for a freshman writing seminar, which is fantastic because everybody is confused in the same sort of way, everyone is excited, and everyone is stressed out in the same sort of way too because it's all new to them. However, students come from many different places and they might be able to adapt a little faster to the higher education environment than other students. And so in addition to just teaching the technology and the tools and all the tricks that come with that, there's also a cultural component which is often overlooked. And some of that is dealing with stress, and other parts of it are who to ask the right questions to, or do I even ask questions? Is it okay to ask questions? I can't just Google this? Yes, yes, I'm a strong advocate for moving beyond just like the traditional reference desk conceptualization and actually sitting down with students and working with them through an entire assignment and soliciting feedback along the way, which is useful to me just because of what my job is. I can report that up to administrators, but it's also important for the student, and it's reflective for me too, to understand how I feel about what I'm doing and how I feel about what the student's doing, and if there's some lower level procedure that we can't change to make the student's life easier, to make our lives easier. So it's a lot to pack into a 20-minute session, and it doesn't always happen there. So I try to do it in very informal ways too when I'm walking around the library, because as great of a building as it is, it's still kind of constricting to sit behind a reference desk or to sit in an office or in a cube, or to have your only formal interactions with students occur in a classroom, kind of like this one, where you're sitting in chairs and someone's up at a lectern and they're speaking at you or hopefully with you. And so there are a lot of informal drop-in sessions or study groups that I try to work with every now and again, or I try to correspond with students to find out what their study habits are so that I can engage them in more, I find them more exciting ways than just in front of computers and inside of a classroom, to gain a better understanding of what their needs are and how they feel about what they're doing. So, let's see. I think in addition to the physical space having a large impact on the way that research happens, at least at Loyola, is, well, and this is typical of a lot of institutions in higher education, is outreach into other departments. And so I'm also a subject specialist for both nursing and chemistry, and nursing is one of the larger departments at Loyola, so they keep me very busy. But it also presents a different sets of need for those majors and for the disciplines. And this is all due to their focuses and the different sets of tools that they have at their disposal and the different demands asked of them by their departments. So there will be different research needs for the professors as with the students. None of this should come as a surprise, but when you have blanket research sessions, people are always shocked that things can be as different as they are. Beyond that, it leads to siloing pretty quickly, which means people talking only to their department and not doing any outreach to other departments. And so as a librarian, I feel like I'm in a very unique position to break down those walls and to create dialogue in different departments, especially starting with students who often come up to me thinking that they can only use a certain set of databases, when I encourage them to not use databases from their department, to gain other perspectives, to not even maybe use databases to begin with, to ask questions of people in their community or ask their professors what kind of sources they would use. And I feel like teaching that kind of understanding of information, it's almost like a research ethic that goes beyond just what databases can offer, because they're limiting. And there's a false assumption that everything is in a database and that you can have your questions be answered just by doing a good keyword search in a database. But it's much more than that. And it takes longer to explain that. And once you realize that you can interact with people and there's a whole community, there's a whole team of ready, willing, and able librarians or teachers, or even your colleagues, especially your colleagues, your students, your fellow students who are there to help you with any given sort of research, it's empowering and it changes the way that you're going to act as a student and as an academic and as a scholar. So that's another component that I'm trying to work into these sessions, and I'm trying to engage the university at a larger level with. But it's hard to do with this understanding of a classroom, and that being the only formal place where you can exchange information. So I'm new to Loyola. I just started a few months ago, and I'm eagerly awaiting opportunities to break out of classrooms and to have other sessions with professors and teachers and work my way into the research flow, as it were, with different committees and just unlikely combinations of people to engage what a library means to the university as a whole and to everyone as a specific individual. Because if we're doing our jobs right, everyone has a reason to spend as much time as they want in that building, and they feel comfortable being there, and they feel comfortable talking to each other and working with each other. And if they want solitary space, there's solitary space. If they want collaborative space, there's collaborative space. If they need to make mistakes and learn and ask questions, and that, most of all, is what a library should be. So there's a lot to talk about, but I guess in closing, I would just encourage you to take some time, either today or like when you go back to work, to think of what the library means to you and what it means to everyone who walks through your door. And if you can answer that for people just beyond you, then you're doing a good job. So thanks. I'm looking forward to questions.
Okay, so we're going to open up for questions now. Come up to this mic up front to ask your question. And
I hope I can shout loud enough. I won't come to a microphone, but thank you. Each presentations were fabulous. We have a zillion questions for each of you. But I want to ask Ed what his 30-second elevator speech might be on evaluating open access journals. I'm old school. I'd love to see an open access magazines for libraries, kind of reference book.
That's a good question. There are some new tools that are being developed to take advantage of open access content and how it's being indexed by systems such as Google Scholar. So there's an Australian scholar who, Australian academic who created a software program, I think called, it has a very good name, it's called Publish or Perish. It's a software. And Publish or Perish goes into Google Scholar and looks at how open access, all sorts of content, but especially open access content is used. And so I go into, when I'm not feeling enthusiastic about working on First Monday, I go into Publish and Perish and go into Google Scholar, and my head gets real big because I see how people are using content from First Monday. So there are tools that are being developed to allow you to get a better handle on the use of openly accessible content. And this ties into the whole promotion and tenure process in the documentation that one needs to move up the academic ladder. I've often worked with scholars in helping them put together portfolios of how their research in First Monday has been used. And that often helps make the case because we can use Google Scholar and other tools to look at citations via the web. The other interesting thing that ties in with open access content that I didn't bring up in my talk is the whole notion of copyright. And many openly accessible journals give authors copyright options where they retain the copyright to their work, or they can choose a Creative Commons license for their work. And that means scholars can take their work and recycle it and reuse it in many different ways, which lends to the greater use of that information. With First Monday, we've had some spectacular successes in that area where in our very first issue, we had two scholars in California who wrote a paper called The Social Life of Documents, which they were approached by Harvard Business School Press. They turned it into a book called The Social Life of Information, and that book went through all sorts of editions and translations, and they retained rights to the paper so they could do all this sort of work with their content. And there are other examples, but I won't bore you with that. But that's one of the other things that openly accessible journals give scholars these copyright options that they didn't have or they don't have with traditional journals, and makes the content more widely available. So that's probably more of an answer than you wanted. But thank you.
I'd like to ask the vision thing. 5 years from now. 5 years ago, maybe we couldn't predict it now. But it's important because of budgets and all kinds of planning to begin to think where are we going to be 5 years from now. Clearly, online journals are taking off, etc. What is the future? Just the economic side. Clearly, the MOOCs and every university is trying to move. Does that mean we're going to have a two-tier system where some people are sitting in their bedrooms online and the privileged are going face-to-face and having the socialization of being on campus with their peers? What's happening here? Where are we going to be 5 years from now? What should we be watching to see which way it's going to go?
I think that's part of the reason that I'm a little skeptical about MOOCs at this particular juncture, because I think that we're not sure where it's going right this minute. And I think a lot of what you said is true. I read an article that said that MOOCs are the new stratifier. And it's along the lines of what you said, that, you know, because MOOCs are so widely open, it provides a lot of opportunity for people to get content that they wouldn't ordinarily have access to. But they aligned it with kind of a bait and switch. In that you can have the first course for free, but you will never get an MIT, Harvard, Loyola, UIUC degree solely via MOOC, right? So they're saying that there's a little bit of a stratification issue with that. The thing that I don't necessarily like about MOOCs thus far is that lack of interaction. It's the same thing. So are the privileged ones the ones that are going to be able to have that interaction with the professors? So I was talking to someone in the Office of Continuing Ed at UIUC, and he said that some of the things that they're thinking about would be, you know, so you can get a badge and then you can get a certificate. And, you know, the badge is free, but the certificate, there's a fee involved. And then if you want the next certification and you want a 45-minute session with the instructor, there's another fee involved. So these aren't really as free as they're made out to be. So in terms of 5 years from now, I think we will have figured out a little bit more about MOOCs and where they stand, but by then there'll be some other technology or some other new option that we're going to start from square one again and figure out, is this revolutionary? Is this going to threaten higher education? Is this going to shut down graduate schools? So as soon as we figure out one, it's going to start again. So.
I've been on coexistence before anything else. I think MOOCs aren't going to go away. I don't think classrooms are going to go away. I think you're going to see more hybrids, and it's not going to be that binary one or the other. They're going to both exist because there's demand for both. How they will both exist is up to us to answer. I think there's a lot of demand for community, but there's also a lot of demand for convenience, and both MOOCs and on-campus offer those in very different ways. So teasing out those details is anyone's guess, but both are not going to go anywhere. We have to embrace both, and we should act accordingly.
Having taught in the LEAP program, when it first started off, I was very disappointed in how it all worked, and I was really upset that I couldn't see how students reacted to my bad jokes. I didn't have those visual cues at all about those. And I found it unfortunate that students expected me to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through that system. And so I quickly soured over that sort of experience teaching that way. And I prefer much the personal experience of working with humanoids in a room and watching them react to my bad jokes and knowing that if they don't laugh, their grade's going to suffer. I really see it not being a binary situation. I think some sort of hybrid situation is going to develop with classroom offerings because, as you pointed out, this need for personal contact is a very strong part of being a human. And having classmates that you can in person sympathize with over an instructor and his bad jokes is very important.
I just had a question. At the beginning, you mentioned something type. Do you remember what you meant by that? This for Wlll. And you're talking about ways of you work at your job. And I think you said Lynn type or something, but I didn't get the word. Where you help scholars present their work, get their work out there.
Oh, it's an e-commons, is that what you're referring to? Like an online repository of papers?
Online repository papers?
Yeah.
And what did you call it?
E-commons. That's just our name for it. U of I has one.
And what did you say before that? Do you remember? Because I have e-commons.
Oh, LibGuides, is that?
LibGuides?
LibGuides, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't catch the word.
LibGuides.
Thank you.
I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to put in a plug for the LEAD program. I am a GISLA student, but I live an hour away from Champaign, so I take most of my classes via LEAD. And as a parent and as a working person, because I'm a teacher, it's the only way I would be able to complete my degree. So I just want to say that I think it is a wonderful program.
I want to probe this question of the future a little bit more because I've read about MOOCs as well, like all college faculty have, and there are instances where people are saying that the course and the students are leaving the faculty behind. Like they're getting together in X town in India and they're having study groups, and they might even be in the library, where they're studying and talking and the instructor's not even in the picture. It seems to me that the kind of library that Wlll described at Loyola is the kind of library that supports that kind of thing. And I wonder if the new modalities of learning and the new modalities of librarianship and the new modalities of journal publishing, because from everything you described, this is the future. Well, privately profitable publishers are fading against their will, but they're fading. So the future is going to go to Swift because the people who gather up in the study groups and leave the professors behind, I say this as a professor, those societies are going to Zoom, whereas societies where we're waiting for the person at the front of the room to tell us are going to be lagging just on the principle of crowdsourcing. Do you see anything like that? Am I a wild dreamer? Am I a fearmonger? What do you think?
So I think you're right, Kate, that crowdsourcing is something new and it's something that the mainstream is going to have to interpret and it's going to have to institutionalize in its own way. And that will take time and it will happen in many different ways depending on where you are, where you're coming from, where your institution is and where it's coming from. But one universal element or dynamic throughout all of it is that nobody has it figured out and nobody is going to have it figured out. There's always going to be somebody who can either help you or guide you. And as a librarian, I see that as one of my major roles. And I say this knowing full well that I don't know everything, and I would never want to know everything. And I'm always going to have to rely on other people to learn new things. So even, I guess this is just kind of like a beyond MOOCs rant, and just kind of a plug for asking questions of other people and relying on other people. It's a very efficient, exceptional way to learn exactly what you're looking for. Soliciting advice, and you know, advisors are always going to play a role in life. And I think as MOOCs move forward, you know, professors are going to be one of those major points of reference. Librarians are going to be one of those major points of reference. Crowds are going to be one of those major points of reference, and they're all going to work with each other to define how we all fit together again as fancy puzzle pieces.
I was watching a TED Talk earlier in the week, and the speaker was talking about going from sage on the stage to guide on the side. And so talking about issues of authority and expertise. So you've got librarians, you've got instructors, and you've got students, and we want them to be active learners. We want them to bring questions to the table, but when it comes to that abundance of information and that information overload that we all experience, you know, sometimes we go back to that reliance on the personal relationship and say, just tell me, you know, and just guide me and help me kind of decipher and discern what is the good information. So I don't think we're going anywhere. It's just we have to be comfortable with the new role and figure out how we are going to co-construct with the students. And it could change from semester to semester to class. It really, we have to be more comfortable with those human dynamics and kind of, I told the one class I'm teaching now, in information behavior, we have to be able and willing and able to embrace that chaos and just kind of, you know, embrace that unexpected. And it's a paradigm shift in terms of how we teach and learn. The other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of your example about people breaking off in groups about the MOOCs, you know, it's the same thing when people took distance education via satellite location or when they did radio or television. If they knew the other people in that university, it's just like having a study group. So it's interesting to see how the technology has changed, but the approach to managing that technology is something that we've seen before in different formats.
Much of this discussion reminds me of the initial reactions that librarians had in 1992, 93, 94 to the widespread use of the internet, especially the World Wide Web as it became available. And there was this great deal of paranoia about, oh, we're going to be replaced by the web, we're going to be replaced by search engines, we're going to be replaced by all this digital information. And so I had very good business going around to state library associations talking about the fact that the internet and the web actually are going to enhance and help libraries and make people realize how important libraries and librarians are in finding the right information. And I think in terms of education, we're going to go through the same sort of experience where you're going to have this group of people who are going to go up and explore a certain subject area, but they're going to come back to instructors as guides, as navigators through courses, through subject matter, much as people have rediscovered libraries in this digital age.
Any other questions?
This panel is higher education. We're on in Afro Studies University of Champaign, Urbana. The panel has been about higher education in the 21st century. I wonder if you would draw some parallels in terms of higher education and its relationship to communities in the 21st century. I mean, I hear implications from all three presentations about what might happen in terms of pedagogy. What do we need to think about to make more effective the town-gown relationship, if you will, the conveying of the scholarship that we do on campus and making it relevant and transformational in non-campus, non-higher education settings?
Let's see. I think one way that I don't want to speak on behalf of any institution with this one, just like my personal outlook on this, because institutions all move a little slower than individuals do. But I view it in terms of audience, and frequently in higher education, the audience is reduced to student and faculty, if that, the emphasis is usually placed on student. Maybe if you're lucky, you get your colleagues as an audience, where you can reflect and grow and understand what they're going through and the issues that they're confronting. Administration is another audience because they're the ones who pay us, and they're the ones who make the decisions and the rules that we all abide by. Another audience. And then the last audience that no one ever puts the emphasis on this community, but we wouldn't be anywhere where we are. We wouldn't be anywhere if it weren't for the community that surrounds our institution or surrounds us. And so that's an audience that I always consider when I go to my job. And I'm very aware, especially making the switch from Chicago Public Library to a private institution, of who walks through the door and who I interact with on a regular basis, and how different that is. And there's not a lot I can do as an individual to change the policies at the library. I mean, I can speak up at meetings, and I do, and I'll continue to do that. But I think a major example right now I can tell you that Loyola is doing is that online repository where work is available widely to the whole world, which is a new conceptualization of community too. And it doesn't speak to the traditional town and gown relationship, but it's like the fruits of the university being offered up at no cost to those who choose to look at it, which is, it's no small feat. And to convince people that this should be the standard is also no small task, but it's what we're doing, it's what we're working on. And that's going to be, I hope it's the norm and standard moving forward.
One of the things I'm working on with several colleagues is trying to do more investigation into community-based research. So the idea is that when we as faculty or scholars or researchers are developing our projects in terms of this town-gown relationship, instead of looking at the community as our participants or our subjects, we should be looking at them as co-creators. So again, the same kind of model with the classroom. So having the community have that investment and come up with the research questions with you and be a full-fledged participant in the study. So not only are they participating, ultimately they will get something out of it, and it's that idea of them having some ownership, right? So I think, again, we need to change how we're engaging with the community. So we need to be more sustainable in our engagement with them, and they need to have more of a stake instead of just being, the recipient or the bystander of the work that we're doing.
With openly accessible scholarship, I see the examples of how individuals are empowered with medical information and health information, thanks to initiatives by the National Library of Medicine. Anyone can find out anything about any medical problem they might have. A great deal of technical literature, proprietary and openly accessible health information is available through the National Library of Medicine. And that has empowered individuals to go to their health professionals, to their physicians with all sorts of information. And it's really, to me, that's really transforming this whole relationship of an individual to their physician. And I see that as an example of what's going to happen with other kinds of scholarship as it becomes more widely available, more widely accessible. People will take that information in communities and use it to make better decisions about change in their community.
Okay, so we are more questions. Last one.
I want to ask a quick question about literacy and standardization of knowledge. When people graduate from high school, there's standardized tests, and that's literacy. When you leave college, there are more tests, GRE, LSAT, whatever. But what about digital literacy? That hasn't been standardized in higher education. In Europe, they have the computer driver's license. They've standardized literacy across European countries. What's the likelihood, what's the need for us to standardize? And I say that because at UIUC, there's a street that runs down the middle of campus. On one side is College of Engineering. They have a particular perspective. On the other side, you get the liberal arts. They have another kind of perspective. These young people come with laptops, writing code, etc. Some of these people get maybe a machine, a gift, as they're coming to college, trying to figure out what it means. What about standardization of this in the context of what higher education is all about?
That's a very good question. My only concern about some sort of standardization, some sort of testing is the bureaucracy that will be created to create that testing process. And I just think of Kafka when I think of that. So I'm a little hesitant to say that we should do this. I see a whole range of students with various levels of sophistication or lack of sophistication in the graduate program that I teach. I see students who can program and do things that I would love to do. These are some of my students, and then there are other students in which I have classes to help them learn how to do markup and learn how to understand and use the internet. So I see this wide range of students in my classroom at the graduate level. And I'm not sure how a digital literacy licensing program could be established. I would rather see programs that already exist expanded in libraries, in institutions of education, higher education, in high schools, even in grade schools, where there are strong efforts to create a digitally literate public through a variety of these programs, informal and formal, that are offered in classrooms and in libraries already. See that growing. But to actually formalize it into some sort of certificate or license that says you're digitally literate, I'm a little fearful about that.
I'm wary of standards just because they're fine when treated as a point of reference. You know, can you achieve these standards? Yes. You know, it's a very simple question, but with a lot of complexity surrounding it, reducing it to a simple yes or no concerns me. And where I see higher education playing a larger role is doing something about the yes or the no. If you do not meet these literacy standards, then what can we do to change that? What can we do to get you to surpass the standards? If you do surpass them, what did you do? And how can we replicate that? Teach us what you know. And if we can fill in gaps, I hate using that phrase, if we can meet everyone where they start and push them further, then I think we're doing our job. And if we need to measure that through standards, then let's do it, but with the understanding that a very diverse set of people are coming to us for a very diverse set of needs, and we're going to leave with a very diverse set of understandings and options and needs for their career. And facilitating that is what interests me.
Did you feel the same way about the math section of the ACT and the GRE? You know, in other words, mathematics is something that is a universal tool, and it's a metric that people use for getting into the workforce. And we're facing the same reality with digital literacy. A lot of this is not an option. It's not subjective. It's not cultural in a varying sense. It's a given.
The comment was about mathematics, and mathematics is, it works well for standards. I don't know.
Well, I'm just, I'll give you the mic.
What about the rate of change of digital literacy compared to mathematics? Like how do you set standards when we've got totally new interfaces every 6 months?
So the comment was, how do we set the standards and expectations for technologies that are consistently changing?
We need to end the session and go on to the next one, but I want to have the last word. There was a press release that came out of UIUC this week of a scientist on the north side of Green Street who has engineering a flexible band that will be inserted into a human brain so that they can observe what's happening in that brain and understand it better. Now, I read this press release after been following what kind of warfare is being waged around the world, and the idea of putting a flexible narrow band, which is then simply a chip in someone's brain, is totally creepy. Why are we even doing this kind of a phenomenon to me? And what I was gratified, so I think digital literacy is really crucial so people can critique that kind of research. And I find this panel to be very reassuring because all of these people were saying the human has to be in this dialogue. We are not going to be able to technologize human life, but there are people who envision that we are. So I think this effort towards open sourcing education librarianship, publishing is really crucial so that we can correct these scholars that are going in directions that are scary to me. And part of that correction is going to happen in the next session, because the next session is a poster session. I want to advertise because there's about 20 plus students who have done these posters, looking back at past knowledge and critiquing it, and they need you to learn what they learned about. So don't go anywhere except to these colorful posters in the next rooms here. And with that, I'm giving it back to Laura.
So let's give a round of applause for our speakers.